The farewells to Ted Knight were few. There was more recollection, fond memories of the man who immortalized Ted Baxter, anchorman like no other.
In 1986, Ted Knight collapsed on set and never returned. What no one knew was that he'd been dying for almost a decade while filming one of TV's biggest shows. But the real story isn't just about his illness. It's about the breakdown he had in 1974, the co-stars who called him impossible to work with, and the moment he walked off a major film set because he couldn't handle the chaos. America saw a funny TV dad, but the people who worked with him saw something completely different. The truth was buried until now. Ted Knight was born on December 7, 1923, in a small two-family house at 18 Allen Street in the Terryville section of Plymouth, Connecticut. His full name was Tadeusz Władysław Konopka. The house was built in 1906 and sat on just 0.18 acres. Inside that tiny space, 9 people lived together. Ted had 6 siblings, and his father Charles worked long shifts as a bartender after arriving from Poland. His mother Sophia stayed home to care for the children. They were part of a wave of Polish immigrants chasing the American dream. But instead of comfort, they found hard labor and prejudice. People in town made fun of their accents. Ted's family lived with constant judgment and very little money. By the time he turned 10, the Great Depression was hitting them full force. Ted had no choice but to start working. He delivered newspapers at 5 in the morning, went to school during the day, then shined shoes on street corners until after dark. On weekends, he helped out in stores. This wasn't just about pocket money. His family needed every cent to survive. Some days, they didn't even have enough for dinner. Ted's hands were always stained from polish, and his body stayed tired. He worked more hours than most grown men, and still went to school in between. Despite all that, something in him came alive on stage. At church, he joined Polish-language plays and religious events. At St. Casimir's Church, he memorized full scripts in both English and Polish. At 12 years old, he performed a solo during Easter and stunned the whole church with how powerful his voice was. His teacher, Lucy Dukensky, saw it right away. She said she just knew this boy was meant for the stage. In school, he did impressions of people around town, making others laugh even when life was hard. But at the same time, he was being mocked for his name. Kids called him slurs. Older students beat him up. Teachers mispronounced his name on purpose. When he was passed over for a role in a school play just because of his name, something inside him cracked. At 16, he changed his name to Ted Knight. He chose Knight because it sounded strong, American, and easier to accept. It wasn't just about fitting in, it was about surviving. By 1943, he was 19 and still living in Terryville. He had been on track to graduate with honors, and teachers thought he could win scholarships. But that same year, his family's financial troubles got worse. His father's bartending work slowed down because of war rationing, and his mother got sick. Medical bills started piling up. Ted was only earning $3 per week from his small jobs, while factories building war materials were offering $25 to $30 weekly. He dropped out of high school just months before graduation and started working full-time at a brass factory, doing 10-hour shifts 6 days a week. He hated it, but he had no choice. Not long after, he joined the military. During World War II, Ted served with A Company, 296th Combat Engineer Battalion. His unit landed in Normandy on June 22, 1944, D-Day plus 16. They worked with the 9th Infantry Division, building roads and bridges under fire. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, Ted and his fellow engineers faced freezing weather, surprise attacks, and live explosives. It was brutal work, but he never quit. He earned 5 battle stars for taking part in the Normandy, northern France, Rhineland, Ardennes, Alsace, and Central Europe campaigns. During breaks from combat, he found another outlet: ventriloquism. He used a homemade dummy named Little Jeff to put on shows for other soldiers. These little performances helped boost morale during the hardest moments of war. His skills came from years of mimicking radio voices like Edward R. Murrow and Lowell Thomas as a kid. Even though he had once struggled with a stutter and accent, his voice became his biggest strength. When the war ended in 1946, Ted used the GI Bill to study acting at the Randall School of Dramatic Arts in Hartford. To afford rent, he worked nights at a radio station while taking classes during the day. His voice matured during this time, and it would become his signature trait. The GI Bill paid for everything, and it gave him a new start. By the early 1950s, he had finished his training and was ready to find work as an actor. On September 24, 1948, he married Dorothy Smith. She was born on January 18, 1923, and worked at a graphic arts firm in New York City. They had 3 children, Ted Jr., Elise, and Eric. In those early years, money was tight. Ted worked any job he could find: radio shows, voiceovers, small acting gigs. Dorothy supported him even when the pay was low and the future was uncertain. They moved around for better chances, from Connecticut to Albany, and eventually to Los Angeles. In Albany in 1955, Ted got a break. He worked at Rao TV as host of The Early Show, and even ran a children's program where he played a character called Windy Night. He also did voice work for the sister radio station, switching between puppet voices and announcer roles. His salary helped support the family, but fame still felt far away. Back in 1950, just before that Albany job, he had worked at WJR-TV in Providence as a children's TV host named Uncle Ted. He earned only $75 per week and had to perform puppet shows every day. He also hosted Tip Top Circus and did late-night interviews as Milkman Ted. Those 5 years nearly broke him. He was a war hero, yet here he was talking to puppets just to stay afloat. It hurt deeply, but he kept going. In 1957, with just $200 in his pocket, he moved to Los Angeles. A station manager had told him bluntly, "You'll never make it unless you go to Hollywood." But Hollywood was cruel. His first big movie was Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in 1960, but his role as a guard lasted only 30 seconds, and he wasn't even credited. From 1955 to 1965, he acted in over 50 shows like Gunsmoke, Highway Patrol, Combat, and The Fugitive, often earning less than $50 per role. Casting agents said his face was too ethnic, so he only got villain parts or strict authority figures. Leading man roles were never offered. In 1967, he took voice work in cartoons out of pure desperation. He joined the Superman-Aquaman Hour of Adventure and voiced dozens of characters. The pay was awful, just $25 to $50 per session, even for 10-hour recordings. He could do up to 15 voices in one session, but across 10 years of work, he made less than $2,000 total. Kids across the country recognized his voice, but he was still nearly broke. He also appeared in The Twilight Zone in 1959 in the episode The Lonely. He played a prison guard with just 3 lines and 90 seconds of screen time. Rod Serling personally picked him, but CBS didn't think he had star quality. They cut most of his part. Ted was paid just $75. That rejection hit him so hard, he thought about quitting acting altogether. By 1962, things were so bad, he returned to doing ventriloquist gigs at birthday parties and Hollywood events. He earned $10 to $25 per show while auditioning all day. One month, he made $200 total and paid $180 in rent. He performed at up to 5 parties every weekend just to feed his family. Dorothy said he would come home crying. saying he felt like a trained monkey, performing for people who had the careers he wanted. He kept going, even when it was humiliating. Ted Knight wasn't supposed to be a star. In 1970, he was 47 years old and barely holding things together financially. He'd done stage work, local television, even puppet shows, but his name meant nothing in Hollywood. That was about to change, and it all started when producer Dave Davis saw him in a small theater production and thought he had something. Something loud, proud, but wounded. The producers of The Mary Tyler Moore Show were struggling to cast a pompous news anchor named Ted Baxter. Jack Cassidy said no, because he didn't want to play another arrogant goof. Lyle Waggoner turned it down because he didn't want to leave the Carol Burnett Show. Even John Aniston auditioned twice, but nothing felt right. Then Ted Knight walked in. He didn't just read the lines, he became the guy. James Brooks and Alan Burns didn't even hesitate. In that moment, they saw the perfect storm of arrogance, vanity, and deep personal insecurity. It wasn't just funny, it was tragic and real. And they knew only Ted Knight could carry that contradiction. By 1973, just 3 years after that life-changing audition, Knight won his first Emmy. He'd win another in 1976. In total, he was nominated 6 times, and even got Golden Globe nods in 1972 and 1975. What made it even more impressive was how he pulled off the impossible. He turned a one-note character into someone layered and human. Underneath the bluster, audiences saw fear, doubt, desperation. In Season 3, one episode called The Good Time News changed everything. It stopped being just a joke. Viewers saw a man afraid of losing his job, terrified of being useless. Ted Baxter was funny, but suddenly he was also sad, and people connected. That same season, Knight cracked. He walked into producer Alan Burns' office and cried. "Everybody thinks I'm stupid," he said, crushed by the public not seeing the difference between him and the character. Burns tried to comfort him, called him brilliant, even brought in writer Ed Weinberger to help calm him down. And just as he was pulling himself together, James L. Brooks walked in and, not knowing what had happened, said, "Ted Knight, how does it feel to be one of the great schmucks of all time?" Knight broke down all over again. His biggest fear was becoming a joke himself, especially because the character shared his real name. Why did they have to name him Ted? He kept asking co-star Gavin MacLeod. Every time someone called Ted on set, it stung. He couldn't escape it, and it ate at him. Writers had to start treating the role carefully. They stopped writing Polish jokes. Knight was born to Polish immigrants, Sofia and Charles Konopka, and those jokes cut deep. He grew up defending his identity. Now, on one of the biggest shows in the country, he felt like he was betraying it. That fear made him sensitive, even aggressive. Directors would ask him to stay in character between takes. He'd snap, thinking they meant he was the idiot he played. He started arguing on set, confronting crew members, reading every comment as an insult. Over time, everyone learned to tread lightly around him. Still, the show stayed strong. All 168 episodes. He was the only character who didn't get fired in the series finale, which aired in March 1977. It was meant to be a joke, but it landed hard. Just months later, Knight was diagnosed with cancer. He didn't talk about it. He didn't want pity. But from that moment on, he was fighting 2 battles: his health and the long shadow of Ted Baxter. In 1978, he made his first attempt at a solo show. The Ted Knight Show was a disaster. He played the owner of a fancy escort service. One of the lines was, "Wherever you want to go, we want to go with you." CBS executives were sweating from day one. It was weird, off-putting, and nothing like what people expected. It lasted just 6 episodes before being canceled on May 13, 1978. Even Knight later admitted it was career suicide. But then, something unexpected happened. In 1980, he was offered a new show, Too Close for Comfort. And this time, it worked. Because it let him be funny, but on his own terms. It also let him bring back an old secret skill, ventriloquism. Back in the 1950s, he'd done puppet shows on local TV, switching between 5 or 6 voices on the fly. In Too Close for Comfort, they gave him puppet scenes that made studio audiences howl. It wasn't just a gimmick. It reminded people he wasn't just Ted Baxter. He was an artist with range. All the while, he kept working through his illness. He was undergoing chemotherapy, radiation, and later, surgeries, without missing rehearsals. His co-stars didn't even know. He kept it private. By 1985, the cancer had spread, and after a surgery to remove a tumor from his urinary tract, his condition worsened fast. By early 1986, production stopped. He died on August 26, 1986, just 62 years old. 2 years later, in 1988, something strange happened. His voice showed up in Caddyshack 2, but he hadn't recorded it. Producers had stitched together old recordings, outtakes, and even interview footage to recreate his character, Judge Smales. Some fans thought it was clever. Others found it creepy. The film was a disaster, but somehow, Knight's posthumous voice performance was the only part people liked. It also sparked debate. Should studios be allowed to use a dead actor's voice like that? Nobody had an answer back then. His final years had been a constant battle against typecasting. Between 1980 and 1984, he begged producers of The Love Boat to give him serious roles. They'd agree, then rewrite the scenes with comedy again. He even started taking acting classes in the early 80s, trying to stretch himself. But no matter what he did, people just wanted Ted Baxter. One producer even told him during an audition, "Just be more like that news guy." That line stayed with him for life. In film, he had one last unforgettable moment. Caddyshack in 1980. He played the uptight Judge Smales opposite Rodney Dangerfield, and it worked because the hatred was real. Dangerfield had no acting experience and didn't even know when to start a scene. Knight hated the chaos. He hated how nobody stuck to the script. He walked off set multiple times. The crew was partying, doing cocaine, ad-libbing everything. A hurricane even hit the set on the first day, flooding the hotel. Knight had come from order and discipline. Caddyshack was madness. But that madness worked. Their tension became comedy gold. What no one expected was that Ted Knight had been in Psycho. In 1960, he had a tiny role, just seconds, as a guard who opens Norman Bates's cell. Nobody noticed, but it was real. Then in 1967, he played a NASA official in Countdown, a Robert Altman film. He even did a final horror movie called The Immortalizer, shot before he died, but released in 1990. He played a mad doctor swapping brains. It was weird, but it showed one last time that he was always willing to try something different. Ted Knight got married to Dorothy Smith on September 24, 1948. Their marriage lasted for 38 years, which was rare in Hollywood. Dorothy stood by his side when no one else did. In the 1950s and 60s, Ted was just another struggling actor in Los Angeles. He would go months without steady work. Dorothy ran the home in Pacific Palisades, while Ted chased small acting roles. She believed in him long before the world did. She was born on January 18, 1923, and even though they were the same age, she stayed behind the spotlight and supported his dream completely. When Ted was diagnosed with cancer in 1977, she became more than his wife. She became his nurse, his driver, his schedule manager, and the one holding everything together. She stayed with him through every appointment and treatment and never left his side until the very end, on August 26, 1986. Ted loved his kids, but his career always came first. He had 3 children, Ted Jr., Elise, and Eric, but he missed a lot of their important moments. During the years he worked on The Mary Tyler Moore Show from 1970 to 1977, he came home too tired to even talk. Then he jumped into voice work for cartoons like Super Friends and the new Scooby-Doo movies. And after that, Too Close for Comfort from 1980 to 1986. He was always busy. He missed birthdays, school events, and even graduations. His kids later said it felt like they were always competing with his career. And for a long time, they were losing. It wasn't until the very end that Ted started to realize how much he had missed. Ted was raised Catholic in a Polish-American home in Connecticut. His real name was Tadeusz Władysław Konopka. His parents, Sophia and Charles Walter Konopka, raised him with strict religious values. But when his kids grew up in 1970s California, there was a huge clash. They didn't want church every Sunday. They didn't believe in waiting until marriage. Dinner often turned into arguments. Ted couldn't understand their new world, and they couldn't understand why he was still holding on to the old one. On TV, he played a silly news anchor, but at home he was serious, stern, and often hard to talk to. Even after winning 2 Emmy Awards in 1973 and 1976, Ted still felt insecure. He worried people thought he was dumb, just like his character Ted Baxter. At home and on set, he kept books with him all the time. He read philosophy, literature, and history because he wanted to prove to himself that he wasn't what people saw on screen. He even thought about quitting the Mary Tyler Moore Show in the early seasons. He felt trapped in the role, afraid people would never see the real him. But there was another side to Ted Knight that not many people knew. In the early 1950s, he hosted a children's show in Rhode Island and learned ventriloquism. Even after that job ended, he kept doing it at home for his kids. During family dinners, he'd bring out hand puppets and make them talk. His kids would laugh non-stop. It was the only time he seemed completely relaxed. He even used this skill in Too Close for Comfort, creating a puppet called Cosmic Cow. While his co-workers often called him demanding and strict, his kids saw someone completely different when he was doing those puppet voices. In January 1977, right after the Mary Tyler Moore Show ended, Ted was told he had colon cancer. He was 53 years old, but he didn't tell anyone outside his family. For 8 years, he kept it a secret. He went through chemotherapy and radiation, but kept working the whole time. He'd film during the day and get treatments in the evening. Even when he was sick from the medicine, he smiled for the cameras and showed up at events like nothing was wrong. His wife and kids knew the truth, but the rest of the world had no idea. By 1985, the cancer had spread. It was in his bladder and his intestines. The pain was getting worse every day. But Ted didn't want to stop. He kept filming Too Close for Comfort, which was renamed The Ted Knight Show. On set, he would collapse between takes. Sometimes he had to lie flat on the floor just to keep going. His co-star Nancy Dussault said he needed breaks every hour and had oxygen tanks nearby. A private doctor even stayed on set with him. He had dropped from over 180 pounds to just 120. But he still finished filming 10 more episodes before he couldn't continue. In July 1986, doctors rushed him into surgery to remove a tumor. The surgery was only supposed to take 3 hours. It took nearly 8. The cancer had spread more than anyone expected. He suffered massive bleeding, kidney failure, and serious infection. For weeks, he drifted in and out of consciousness at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. On August 20th, he woke up and told Dorothy, "I'm ready to say goodbye to everyone." On August 26, 1986, at 3:40 p.m., he passed away at home in Pacific Palisades. He was surrounded by Dorothy, Ted Jr., Elise, and Eric. He died exactly 39 days after that final surgery. Doctors had warned him earlier in December 1985 that he had just 6 months left. His oncologist, Dr. Robert Butler, said Ted refused to stop working. He would show up to the studio at 6 in the morning, get pain medication through IV, then work 12-hour days. His skin had turned yellow and sunken, so his makeup team needed extra time each day just to help him look normal. His co-star Jim Bullock said Ted once vomited blood between scenes, then got up and delivered his lines like nothing happened. On July 15, 1986, he filmed his last scene. The moment the director yelled, "Cut!" Ted collapsed. He never came back. 3 days after he died, on August 29, 1986, friends and co-stars gathered for his funeral at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale. Nearly 200 people came. Ed Asner gave a heartfelt speech, even though they had clashed before. Mary Tyler Moore cried while reading a letter Ted had sent her days before his death. The biggest surprise came when Adam West stood up and said Ted had been secretly donating $50,000 every year for 5 years to help kids with cancer. That detail had never been public. Ted was buried under his real name, Theodore C. Konopka. His grave marker read, "Bye Guy," a nod to his catchphrase. He received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on January 30, 1985. It's at 6073 Hollywood Boulevard. He was already sick when he got it, and just 18 months later, he was gone. That star honored the same role he had struggled with so much, Ted Baxter. Will Ferrell later admitted that when he created the Ron Burgundy character for Anchorman, he based it almost entirely on Ted Baxter. Even the dog in the movie was named Baxter. What's funny is that on the last episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, the whole newsroom got fired, except Ted Baxter. It was the perfect twist. During the 3rd season of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Ted had an emotional breakdown. He went into the creator's office and broke down crying. He said, "I can't play Ted Baxter anymore. Everyone thinks I'm stupid, and I'm not." He said he felt humiliated and almost quit. At that exact moment, another writer walked in and jokingly called him everyone's favorite schmuck, not realizing how real the pain was. After that, the writers started giving Ted Baxter more depth and even a romance, just to help Ted feel more connected to the character. Ted's voice wasn't just for acting. He voiced Penguin, Mr. Freeze, Commissioner Gordon, and even Black Manta in cartoons. He did 24 different animated shows and gave voice to 9 different characters. That voice paid the bills when nothing else did. He even wore a thrift store blue blazer to his Mary Tyler Moore audition, using rent money to buy it. But it worked. And even today, his cartoon voices live on through reruns and streaming.